Today, we journey into the twisted realm of Dark Souls 2 to explore one of the most fascinating and tragic figures in the entire Dark Souls universe, Aldia, scholar of the first sin. Over the next couple hours, we'll uncover the rise and fall of King Vendrick's elder brother, his horrifying experiments in pursuit of truth, and the terrible price he paid for trying to break free from the cycle of light and dark. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin this epic adventure into madness and revelation. When we speak of Dark Souls 2, we often focus on the familiar themes of linking the fire or letting it fade. But Aldia represents something far more complex and disturbing, a brilliant mind that saw through the lies of the world itself and paid the ultimate price for that knowledge. He is, quite literally, the scholar of the first sin, named after the very act that condemned humanity to an endless cycle of suffering. To understand Aldia, we must first understand what that first sin truly was. The nature of the first sin. Long before the kingdom of Drangleic ever existed, in the primordial age when the first flame brought disparity to the world, 4 great souls were found in the flame. The lords, Gwyn, the Witch of Izalith, Nito, and the furtive pygmy, claimed these souls and used them to wage war against the immortal stone dragons. But as the flame began to fade, as all fires must, Gwyn committed an act that would echo through countless ages. Rather than allow the natural cycle to complete itself and usher in the Age of Dark, Gwyn chose to link his soul to the first flame, becoming the first Lord of Cinder. This act, this desperate clinging to power and light, was the first sin. It wasn't simply a mistake or miscalculation. It was a fundamental violation of the natural order, a rejection of humanity's true nature, and the onset of an artificial cycle that would trap souls in an endless loop of linking and fading. Aldia understood this truth in ways that few others ever could. Through his dialogue, we learn that he saw how Gwyn, the Lord of Light, banished dark and all that stemmed from humanity. When the flame was linked, humans were given what Aldia calls fleeting form, a cursed existence where they would hollow when they died, losing their humanity piece by piece unless they could gather more souls to sustain themselves. This wasn't a blessing or protection. It was a trap designed to ensure that humanity would always serve the flame, either by feeding its souls or by eventually being driven to link it themselves. The curse of undeath, the dark sign that marks every undead, the endless cycle of kingdoms rising and falling, all of this stems from that first sin. And Aldia, more than perhaps any other character in the series, devoted his entire existence to understanding and ultimately trying to break free from this cycle. The brother who helped build a kingdom. But Aldia's story doesn't begin with cosmic truths and eldritch transformations. It begins much more humbly, with 2 brothers who dreamed of building something lasting in a world defined by decay. Aldia was the elder brother of Vendrick, and together they founded the kingdom of Drangleic from the ruins of countless kingdoms that had come before. This partnership speaks to Aldia's character in ways that are often overlooked. He could have claimed the throne himself as the elder sibling. He could have seized power and ruled directly. Instead, he chose to support his younger brother, working from the shadows to ensure Drangleic's success. This wasn't born from weakness or lack of ambition. It was a conscious choice made by someone who valued knowledge and understanding over political power. The relationship between the brothers was, by all accounts, close in those early days. They shared the same goal, to break the curse of undeath that plagued their subjects and find a way to free humanity from the endless cycle of fire and dark. Where they would eventually differ was in their methods and how far they were willing to go in pursuit of that goal. Vendrick approached the problem like a king, seeking solutions through conquest, diplomacy, and the accumulation of power. He crossed the sea to wage war against the giants, partly at the manipulation of Nashandra, but also in pursuit of their secrets. He sought the ancient dragon and the crown of the Ivory King, gathering artifacts and souls that might hold the key to understanding the curse. Aldia, meanwhile, approached the problem like a scholar. He believed the answer lay in understanding the fundamental nature of souls, life, and death itself. This drove him to gather some of the greatest minds of the age at his manor, creating a research facility unlike anything the world had seen. These weren't just sorcerers or clerics. They were true scholars of the arcane. People who understood that magic wasn't simply about throwing fireballs or healing wounds, but about comprehending the very fabric of reality. The Warlock Mask tells us that these scholars gave rise to wicked things and even forbidden rituals upon themselves. The question it poses is haunting. No one knows if they were born mad or if their own misdeeds drove them over the edge. This isn't a casual observation. It's a fundamental question about the nature of knowledge itself. Does seeking certain truths inevitably lead to madness? Or do only the mad dare to seek such truths in the first place? The pursuit of forbidden knowledge. Aldia's Keep stands as a monument to ambition unchecked by moral restraint. Walking through its halls, you encounter the remnants of experiments that would make even the most hardened scholar recoil in horror. The very atmosphere of the place speaks to years of progressively darker research, each discovery pushing the boundaries of what was considered acceptable further and further. The northern and southern ritual bands, powerful rings that could enhance magical capabilities, came from Aldia's research. But their item descriptions tell us exactly what price was paid for their creation. To imagine what unspeakable deeds were performed to create such rings, one need only recall the cruel fate of the residents of Aldia. This isn't hyperbole or exaggeration. The people who came to Aldia's Keep, researchers, scholars, even ordinary citizens, became test subjects in experiments that defy comprehension. The homunculus mace and wooden shield provide glimpses into the nature of these experiments. They're adorned with strange spherical lumps that contain what appears to be humanity itself, artificial life created through the manipulation of dark souls. This wasn't theoretical research. Aldia was literally attempting to create life, to understand the process by which souls generated consciousness and identity. The dragon acolytes throughout the keep tell another part of the story. These weren't willing converts to some dragon-worshipping cult. They were researchers who had been transformed through Aldia's attempts to recreate dragons. The very fact that a giant dragon skeleton lunges at you when you enter the keep suggests that these experiments weren't entirely successful, but they were certainly comprehensive. Perhaps most disturbing of all are the enhanced undead, hollows that have been modified and enhanced through Aldia's research. Their presence at Sinner's Rise, the same location where we find the lost sinner who possessed the soul of the Witch of Izalith, suggests that Aldia's research connected him to the original chaos of the Bed of Chaos. This isn't coincidental. Aldia's transformed appearance, with its branch-like appendages and fiery aura, bears a striking resemblance to the Bed of Chaos itself. This connection raises profound questions about the nature of Aldia's research and ultimate transformation. Did he deliberately seek to recreate the Witch of Izalith's attempt to create a new flame? Was his transformation the result of trying to master the same chaotic forces that consumed Izalith? Or was this similarity simply the inevitable result of any attempt to fundamentally alter the nature of life and death? The rift between brothers. As Aldia's research grew more extreme, the relationship between the brothers began to fracture. The Aldia key tells us the tragic truth. King Vendrick condemned his own elder brother to the mansion. They both sought the truth, but through different means, and their fervour meant the eventual withering of their familial ties. This wasn't a sudden break or a moment of explosive anger. It was a gradual erosion of trust and understanding between two people who had once shared everything. Vendrick, for all his flaws, remained fundamentally human in his approach to problems. He understood that there were lines that shouldn't be crossed, boundaries that needed to be respected, even in the pursuit of the greater good. Aldia saw these moral constraints as obstacles to understanding. From his perspective, the curse of undeath was causing infinite suffering across countless generations. If a few hundred or even a few thousand test subjects had to suffer and die to break that curse, wasn't that a fair trade? This utilitarian calculus, the willingness to sacrifice the few for the many, is what ultimately drove the wedge between the brothers. But there was another factor at play here, one that speaks to Aldia's growing isolation from humanity itself. The Dragon Acolyte armor tells us that several of the greatest minds converged in Aldia to weave strange new rituals, but rumors suggest that during the course of their work, their thoughts were not their own. This suggests that Aldia and his researchers weren't simply driven mad by their discoveries. They may have been influenced or manipulated by forces beyond their understanding. When you're dealing with the fundamental forces of souls, life, and death, you're inevitably touching powers that exist beyond human comprehension. The Sunset Staff, forged in Aldia, is particularly powerful for casting hexes, dark magic that draws its power from humanity itself. The more Aldia delved into these mysteries, the more he may have opened himself to influences that human minds weren't meant to handle. Vendrick's decision to lock Aldia away wasn't just about stopping the experiments. It was about protecting what remained of his brother's humanity, and perhaps protecting the kingdom from whatever Aldia might become if his research continued unchecked. In the end, this protection came too late. The terrible transformation, what happened to Aldia after Vendrick sealed him away, is one of the most tragic transformations in the entire Dark Souls universe. Through his experiments, particularly his attempts to understand and shed what he called the yoke of fate, Aldia pushed his research to its ultimate conclusion, experimenting upon himself. The result was the creature we encounter in Scholar of the First Sin, a massive, grotesque entity that appears to be composed of fire, branches, and raw magical energy, with a single red orb that might be an eye. This isn't death in any conventional sense. Aldia has become something beyond human understanding, bound to the bonfires themselves, the very symbols of the cycle he sought to break. What makes Aldia's transformation particularly fascinating is that it appears to have achieved a form of immortality, but at the cost of everything that made him human. When we defeat him in the Throne of Want, he doesn't die like other bosses. He dissipates into smoke and continues speaking to us, having transcended conventional existence. He drops no souls, gives no tangible reward, because he has moved beyond the normal rules that govern souls and mortality. This transformation has a deeper symbolic meaning that connects to the themes of Dark Souls 2. Aldia sought to break free from the cycle of fire and dark, but in doing so, he became trapped in an even more fundamental way. He gained the knowledge he sought, understanding the true nature of the first sin and the cycle that binds humanity, but lost the ability to act on that knowledge in any meaningful way. His form, resembling the bed of chaos with its branch-like protrusions and fiery appearance, suggests that his research into the nature of life and chaos ultimately consumed him, just as it had consumed the Witch of Izalith. But where the witch's transformation was accidental, the result of a desperate attempt to recreate the first flame, Aldia's transformation appears to have been deliberate, the final step in a research project that had already cost him everything else. The scholar's understanding. What sets Aldia apart from other tragic figures in Dark Souls is the depth of his understanding. While characters like Vendrick eventually grasped the futility of the cycle, they did so too late to act on that knowledge. Aldia, by contrast, understood the nature of the first sin and its consequences, while he still had the power to research a solution. His dialogue throughout Scholar of the First Sin reveals someone who has seen through all the comfortable lies that allow people to function in their cursed world. He understands that the choice between linking the fire and letting it fade is no choice at all. Both paths simply perpetuate the cycle in different ways. He knows that the undead curse isn't a disease to be cured, but a fundamental aspect of reality as Gwyn reshaped it. When Aldia speaks of peace, he's referring to the illusion that allows humans to believe their lives have meaning within the current system. Peace grants men the illusion of life, he tells us. Shackled by falsehoods, they yearn for love, unaware of its grand illusion. This isn't cynicism speaking, it's the voice of someone who has looked behind the curtain and seen the machinery that keeps the world functioning. The tragedy of Aldia is that his understanding is essentially correct. The cycle of fire and dark is a trap. The undead curse is an artificial construct designed to serve the needs of the flame rather than humanity. The choices presented to every chosen undead throughout history are false choices that ultimately change nothing. But having this knowledge doesn't automatically provide a solution. Aldia's research was an attempt to find what he calls a third path, something beyond the simple binary of light and dark. His experiments with dragons, his attempts to understand the nature of souls, his horrifying studies of life and death, all of this was aimed at finding a way to break free from the cycle entirely. And in a sense, he succeeded. He found a way to exist outside the normal rules, to transcend the limitations that bind other souls. But this transcendence came at a price that ultimately makes it meaningless. What good is freedom from the cycle if you can no longer act within the world? What value is immortality if you've lost everything that made life worth living? Aldia's transformation is a cautionary tale about the dangers of pursuing knowledge without wisdom, understanding without compassion, the ancient dragon connection and theoretical recreations. One of the most intriguing aspects of Aldia's research is his apparent attempt to recreate dragons. The guardian dragon that serves as a boss in his keep isn't a natural dragon, it's an artificial creation, and examining its soul raises disturbing questions about Aldia's methods and motivations. The ancient dragon at the Dragon Shrine presents an even more complex mystery. While never explicitly confirmed, substantial evidence suggests this being may also be one of Aldia's creations rather than a true ancient dragon. When killed, it drops a giant soul rather than an ancient dragon soul. The real ancient dragon soul can only be found in the memory of a dragon accessed through Freya's arena. Nashandra dismisses it as a false deity and prop, while Sweet Shalquar cryptically refers to something playing the part of a great creature. This theory suggests that Aldia discovered something crucial about giant souls, that they possessed properties that could sustain artificial dragon forms. Giants in Dark Souls 2 appear to exist outside the normal rules that govern human souls, resistant to the undead curse and possessing remarkably stable souls. If Aldia could harness this stability to power artificial dragons, he might have believed he was creating beings that could exist outside the cycle of fire and dark. Dragons in Dark Souls represent something primal and eternal. The ancient dragons existed before the first flame brought disparity to the world. They were immortal not through any special power or magical protection, but because they existed in a state of perfect stasis, a world without life or death, without light or dark, without change or growth. Yet even if these theories about Aldia's dragon recreations are correct, they represent a fundamental failure to understand the true nature of the problem he sought to solve. His artificial dragons, whether the guardian dragon or the theorized ancient dragon, weren't true solutions. They were still artificial creations, bound to serve rather than truly free. The attempt to recreate the dragon's immortal stasis only resulted in another form of servitude. This failure speaks to a fundamental limitation in Aldia's approach. He sought to solve the problem of human nature by changing human nature itself, rather than accepting it and working within its constraints. His research was aimed at making humans into something other than human. Dragons, artificial beings, transcendent entities that existed beyond the normal rules of life and death. The price of knowledge. The most chilling aspect of Aldia's story is how it demonstrates the price of forbidden knowledge. Throughout his keep, we see evidence of the gradual corruption of everyone involved in his research. The Warlock mask raises the question of whether the researchers were born mad or driven mad by their work, but the evidence suggests the latter. The northern and southern ritual bands speak of unspeakable deeds performed to create them. The homunculus mace and other artifacts show clear evidence of experiments on living subjects. The enhanced undead demonstrate that Aldia was willing to transform people into monsters for the sake of his research. Each discovery seemed to require greater and greater moral compromises. This escalation is typical of how corruption works in Dark Souls. It rarely announces itself with dramatic fanfare. Instead, it creeps in gradually, each small compromise making the next one easier to justify. First, you're just studying souls in the abstract. Then you need test subjects to understand how souls function in living beings. Then you need to experiment on those subjects to see how souls can be modified or enhanced. Before you know it, you're creating artificial life from the suffering of hundreds of victims. The Dragon Acolyte armor tells us that rumors suggested the researchers' thoughts were not their own. This hints at another layer of corruption, the possibility that the pursuit of certain knowledge inevitably opens the mind to influences that human consciousness isn't equipped to handle. When you're studying the fundamental forces that govern reality, you're touching powers that exist beyond human understanding. Aldia's transformation can be seen as the ultimate endpoint of this corruption. He didn't become a monster through accident or external influence. He became a monster through the logical progression of his research. Each experiment pushed him further from humanity. Each discovery made him more willing to sacrifice human values for abstract understanding. In the end, he achieved his goal of transcending human limitations. But the person who achieved that goal was no longer recognizably the person who had started the journey. The Scholar and the Cycle. What makes Aldia's story particularly tragic is how it reflects the very cycle he sought to break. Just as the cycle of fire and dark traps souls in an endless loop of false choices, Aldia's pursuit of knowledge trapped him in a different kind of cycle. One where each answer only revealed new questions. Each solution only created new problems. His research into the nature of souls led him to experiment on living subjects. His experiments led him to understand the artificial nature of the undead curse. Understanding the curse led him to seek ways to break it. Seeking to break it led him to study dragons and giants. Studying these beings led him to attempt recreating their immortal nature. Each step was logical. Each decision was rational within its own context, but the overall progression led him inexorably toward monstrosity. This mirrors the way the cycle of fire and dark operates. Each chosen undead makes what seems like a reasonable choice. Link the fire to preserve the world, or let it fade to end the suffering. But both choices ultimately perpetuate the same system that created the problem in the first place. The cycle continues not because anyone wants it to, but because the choices available within the system are designed to preserve the system itself. Aldia recognized this pattern in the broader world, but he couldn't see how it applied to his own research. He understood that the choices between fire and dark were false choices, but he couldn't see that his own choice between accepting humanity's limitations and transcending them was equally false. In trying to break free from one cycle, he created another. The Scholar of the First Sin represents the ultimate tragedy of the Dark Souls universe. The tragedy of understanding without wisdom, knowledge without compassion, truth without hope. He achieved everything he set out to achieve. He understood the nature of the first sin. He transcended human limitations. He found a way to exist beyond the cycle of fire and dark. But in doing so, he lost everything that might have made those achievements meaningful: the artificial dragon and ancient memories. Aldia's attempts to recreate dragons connect to some of the deepest mysteries in Dark Souls 2. The ancient dragon that we can encounter at the Dragon Shrine appears to be another of his creations, though one far more sophisticated than the guardian dragon at his keep. This being can grant us the Ashen Mist Heart, allowing us to travel into the memories of the dead, a power that suggests capabilities far beyond what any artificial creation should possess. If the ancient dragon is indeed Aldia's creation, as suggested by the giant soul it drops when killed, then it represents perhaps the closest he came to achieving his goals. Here is an artificial being that possesses powers rivaling those of true ancient dragons, capable of existing across time and memory in ways that transcend normal limitations. But even this apparent success carries dark implications. The very fact that this ancient dragon is artificial speaks to the fundamental deception at the heart of Aldia's work. He wasn't restoring the world to some previous state of perfection. He was creating elaborate fabrications designed to replicate power he couldn't truly understand. The memories we access through the Ashen Mist Heart show us events from the war between Drangleic and the Giants, but they also reveal deeper truths about the nature of time and causality in the Dark Souls universe. These aren't simple recordings of past events. They're living fragments of history that we can enter and influence. The power to create and manipulate such memories represents godlike abilities, the kind of fundamental control over reality that would be necessary to truly break the cycle. Yet even here, Aldia's limitations become apparent. The memories show us what happened, but they don't provide solutions. We can witness Vendrick's war against the Giants, but we can't prevent it. We can see the events that led to Drangleic's downfall, but we can't change them. The power to access these memories is remarkable, but it's ultimately just another form of observation, more sophisticated than his other research, but still fundamentally passive. This connects to a broader theme in Aldia's story: the difference between understanding and action. He gained incredible knowledge about the nature of the world, developed powerful magical techniques, and achieved forms of existence beyond normal human comprehension. But all of this knowledge and power couldn't help him achieve his fundamental goal of breaking the cycle and freeing humanity from its curse. The true nature of the Giants. Aldia's research into giants reveals another layer of his understanding about the nature of souls and existence. Giants in Dark Souls 2 are presented as fundamentally different from humans. They appear to lack faces in the conventional sense. Their souls are described as being particularly pure and powerful, and they seem to exist according to different rules than human souls. The war between Drangleic and the Giants, orchestrated by Nashandra's manipulation of Vendrick, brought giant souls into the kingdom where Aldia could study them. What he discovered about these beings may have shaped his understanding of what it might mean to exist outside the cycle of fire and dark. Giants appear to be resistant to or immune from the undead curse. We never see hollow giants in the way we see hollow humans. Their souls don't fragment and degrade the way human souls do. They seem to exist in a state that's more stable and permanent than human existence, though they're clearly not immortal in the way that the ancient dragons were. The fact that giant souls can power artificial dragons suggests a deep connection between these two forms of existence. Both giants and dragons represent ways of being that exist outside or alongside the cycle that traps humanity. Giants maintain their coherent existence without needing to constantly gather souls or risk hollowing. Dragons existed in perfect stasis before the flame brought change and disparity to the world. Aldia's research into giants and his attempts to recreate dragons were likely part of the same fundamental project, finding a way for humans to exist according to different rules than those imposed by Gwyn's first sin. If humans could somehow adopt the stable existence of giants or the immortal stasis of dragons, they might be able to escape the cycle entirely. But this research also reveals the limitations of Aldia's approach. He was trying to solve the problem of human nature by making humans into something other than human. Rather than finding a way for humans to thrive within their own nature while escaping the artificial constraints imposed by the cycle, he sought to change human nature itself. The Emerald Herald, and Aldia's possible greatest creation. One of Aldia's most significant potential achievements, though one that remains speculative, is his possible creation of the Emerald Herald. While this connection isn't explicitly confirmed in the game, there are compelling hints that this mysterious figure who guides the bearer of the curse may be another of Aldia's artificial beings, perhaps his most sophisticated creation. The Emerald Herald's ability to strengthen souls, her knowledge of the curse and its nature, her otherworldly appearance and manner of speaking, all of these suggest she's not a natural human being. Her own words hint at artificial origins. "I was born of dragons, contrived by men." The theory that she was created by Aldia and possibly Vendrick gained support from her role in guiding the bearer of the curse toward the Four Old Ones and eventually to the Throne of Want, serving Aldia's ultimate purposes even while appearing to serve traditional goals. If the Emerald Herald is indeed Aldia's creation, and this remains theoretical rather than confirmed, she represents a different approach to his research than the horrifying experiments at his keep. Rather than trying to transform existing beings into something else, he created an entirely artificial being designed to serve a specific purpose. This being possesses impressive powers. The ability to strengthen souls is extraordinary in the context of the Dark Souls universe, but she exists within the world rather than trying to transcend it. The Herald's guidance of the bearer of the curse serves multiple purposes that align with Aldia's goals. By strengthening the bearer and directing them toward the Old Ones, she ensures that someone powerful enough to potentially break the cycle will eventually reach the Throne of Want. Her presence throughout the journey provides opportunities for the bearer to grow in understanding, preparing them for the choice that Aldia will eventually offer. But the Herald's ultimate role is perhaps more subtle. She represents proof that artificial life can be created with purpose and intelligence, without the horrific corruption that characterized most of Aldia's other experiments. If he could create a being like the Emerald Herald, it suggests that his research wasn't entirely futile, that it was possible to use knowledge of souls and existence to create something positive rather than simply monstrous. Yet even this achievement is tinged with tragedy. The Emerald Herald, for all her power and knowledge, is still bound to serve the system that Aldia sought to overthrow. She guides the bearer of the curse toward the Throne of Want, toward the same false choice between fire and dark that has trapped every chosen undead throughout history. Only Aldia's direct intervention at the end offers a third option: the philosophy of the scholar. Throughout his dialogue in Scholar of the First Sin, Aldia reveals a philosophical perspective that's both profound and deeply troubling. He understands that the world as it exists is built on fundamental deceptions, but his response to this understanding is complex and morally ambiguous. When he speaks of the illusion of life that peace provides, he's not simply being nihilistic. He recognizes that most people need these illusions to function, that the truth about the cycle and the curse would be psychologically devastating to anyone who fully understood it. He sees the world as a construction, a facade, and yet a world full of warmth and resplendence. This suggests a kind of tragic empathy in Aldia's character. He understands that the false world is still a world where people can experience love, joy, hope, and meaning, even if those experiences are ultimately illusory. His question to the bearer of the curse, "Young Hollow, are you intent on shattering the yoke, spoiling this wonderful falsehood?" isn't rhetorical. He genuinely wants to know if the truth is worth the destruction of everything that makes life bearable. But Aldia's empathy is coupled with a fundamental detachment from humanity that makes his philosophy dangerous. He can appreciate the beauty of the false world intellectually, but he's no longer emotionally invested in it. His transformation has placed him beyond human concerns, allowing him to contemplate the destruction of everything people hold dear with academic detachment. This detachment is perhaps the most tragic aspect of Aldia's transformation. In seeking to understand and transcend human limitations, he lost the very qualities that might have guided him toward wisdom rather than mere knowledge. Compassion, love, hope. These weren't obstacles to understanding that needed to be overcome. They were essential aspects of humanity that needed to be preserved and honored even in the pursuit of truth. Aldia's offer of a third path reflects this philosophical confusion. He recognizes that the cycle of fire and dark is a trap, and he wants to offer an alternative. But his alternative is essentially nihilistic, walking away from all choices, rejecting both the false and the real, seeking something beyond the scope of light and the reach of dark, without any clear idea of what that something might be. The bonds of family. The relationship between Aldia and Vendrick serves as one of the most poignant elements of the entire Dark Souls 2 narrative. These two brothers, who began with shared goals and mutual affection, ultimately became separated by their different approaches to the same fundamental problem. Vendrick's approach to the undead curse was practical and political. He sought solutions through conquest and accumulation of power, believing that with enough strength and the right artifacts, he could force a solution to the problem. This led him to wage war against the giants, to seek out the ancient dragon, and to gather the crowns of fallen kings, all in service of finding a way to break the curse without having to make the traditional choice between fire and dark. Aldia's approach was intellectual and scientific. He believed that understanding the true nature of the curse would reveal a solution, that knowledge itself could provide the key to freedom. This led him to gather scholars and researchers, to conduct increasingly extreme experiments, and ultimately to sacrifice his own humanity in pursuit of truth. The tragedy is that both brothers were essentially correct in their approaches. Vendrick's gathering of power and artifacts did reveal important truths about the nature of the curse and the cycle. The crowns he collected could indeed provide protection from the effects of the curse, offering a form of limited freedom from its constraints. Aldia's research did uncover the fundamental truths about the first sin and the artificial nature of the cycle, providing the understanding necessary to recognize that the traditional choices were false. But neither brother could achieve their goals alone. Vendrick's practical approach needed the understanding that Aldia's research provided. Aldia's theoretical knowledge needed the power and resources that Vendrick's kingdom could offer. Their separation didn't just doom their individual efforts, it doomed the very possibility of finding a real solution to the problem they both sought to solve. The fact that Vendrick ultimately locks Aldia away speaks to the fundamentally different values that came to separate them. Vendrick retained his humanity and his moral constraints, even when those constraints made his quest more difficult. He couldn't accept the price that Aldia was willing to pay for knowledge, couldn't allow the experiments to continue, even if they might eventually produce a solution. Aldia, by contrast, came to see moral constraints as obstacles to understanding. From his perspective, the suffering of a few test subjects was insignificant compared to the suffering caused by the cycle itself. His willingness to sacrifice others, and ultimately himself, in pursuit of truth reflected a utilitarian calculus that Vendrick couldn't accept. The locking away of Aldia represents one of the great what-if moments in Dark Souls lore. What if Vendrick had found a way to channel his brother's research toward less horrifying ends? What if Aldia had retained enough humanity to accept moral constraints on his work? What if the two brothers had found a way to combine Vendrick's practical approach with Aldia's theoretical understanding? The weight of immortality. Aldia's transformation granted him a form of immortality, but it's an immortality that serves as a punishment rather than a reward. unlike the natural immortality of the ancient dragons, which existed in perfect unchanging stasis, Aldia's immortality is active and conscious. He's aware of his condition, aware of what he's lost, and aware of the limitations that his transformation has imposed upon him. When he tells us that he lost everything, but remained here patiently, there's a profound sadness in those words. He achieved his goal of transcending human limitations and escaping the normal rules of mortality, but in doing so, he lost everything that might have made such transcendence meaningful. He can no longer act in the world in any meaningful way. He can no longer form human relationships or experience human emotions. He exists as a consciousness bound to the bonfires, capable of observing and understanding, but incapable of truly living. This form of existence reflects a deeper truth about the nature of consciousness and identity in the Dark Souls universe. Souls aren't just sources of power or markers of identity. They're the foundation of everything that makes existence meaningful. When Aldia transformed himself beyond the normal rules that govern souls, he didn't just change his physical form. He changed the fundamental nature of his existence in ways that made it impossible for him to participate in the world he sought to save. The immortality that Aldia achieved is, in many ways, a form of hollowing more complete than anything that afflicts normal undead. Hollow undead lose their memories, their personalities, their ability to form new experiences, but they can still be restored if they gather enough souls and humanity. Aldia's transformation appears to be irreversible. He's gained perfect knowledge and understanding, but lost the capacity to grow, change, or form new experiences. This connects to broader themes about the relationship between knowledge and wisdom in the Dark Souls universe. Characters who gain too much knowledge too quickly, like Seath the Scaleless in the first game, or the scholars of the Grand Archives in the third, often lose their sanity or their humanity in the process. Aldia represents the ultimate endpoint of this progression. Perfect knowledge coupled with the complete inability to use that knowledge for any constructive purpose, the final test and the third path. When we finally encounter Aldia as a boss in the Throne of Want, the fight itself is less important than what it represents. This isn't a battle between good and evil, or even between opposing philosophies. It's a test. Aldia's final attempt to determine whether the bearer of the curse is truly capable of walking a different path than all who came before. The mechanics of the fight reflect this purpose. Aldia doesn't attack with the desperate fury of a creature fighting for its life, nor with the mechanical precision of a guardian defending something precious. His attacks are measured, deliberate, almost educational. He demonstrates his power, tests our resolve, and observes our responses. The fact that he continues speaking after his defeat makes it clear that destruction was never his goal. What Aldia is really testing is whether the bearer of the curse has developed beyond the simple binary thinking that has trapped every previous chosen undead. Throughout history, heroes have arrived at moments of crisis with the power to link the fire or let it fade. But they've never questioned whether those were the only options available. They've accepted the choice presented to them without considering that the choice itself might be designed to perpetuate the very system they're trying to change. The bearer of the curse, guided by the Emerald Herald and strengthened by encounters with the Old Ones, represents something new in this cycle. For the first time, someone arrives at the Throne of Want with not just the power to make the traditional choice, but with the understanding to question whether that choice should be made at all. Aldia's dialogue before and during the fight reveals his ultimate purpose. He doesn't want to stop the bearer of the curse from reaching the throne. He wants to ensure that when they get there, they're capable of seeing beyond the false choices that have trapped everyone else. His test is designed to awaken the kind of thinking that might actually lead to something different. The third path that Aldia offers isn't a solution in any conventional sense. It's not a way to break the curse or end the cycle or restore the world to some previous state of perfection. It's simply the recognition that false choices don't have to be accepted, that it's possible to walk away from systems designed to perpetuate themselves, even when walking away means entering unknown territory. This path requires a kind of courage that's different from the heroic bravery typically celebrated in the Dark Souls universe. It's not the courage to face overwhelming odds or to sacrifice oneself for the greater good. It's the courage to reject certainty, to choose uncertainty over false security, to enter the unknown rather than accepting familiar forms of bondage. The legacy of the scholar. Aldia's influence extends far beyond his physical presence in Dark Souls 2. His research, his understanding, and his ultimate transformation represent a fundamental shift in how the Dark Souls universe approaches questions of fate, choice, and human nature. The connection between Aldia and the scholars of Dark Souls 3 is explicitly acknowledged in the Soulstream sorcery, which refers to him as the first of the scholars. This suggests that his approach to understanding the nature of souls and existence influenced generations of researchers who came after him. The Grand Archives in Lothric, with their focus on scholarly research and their tragic corruption of the researchers, can be seen as inheriting Aldia's legacy. But Aldia's influence goes deeper than simply inspiring future scholars. His recognition that the cycle of fire and dark was artificial and self-perpetuating introduced a new level of meta-awareness into the Dark Souls universe. Characters in later games show signs of understanding that their choices might be manipulated, that the crises they face might be manufactured rather than natural. The Prince Lothric of Dark Souls 3, for example, refuses to link the fire not out of despair or inability, but out of a conscious rejection of his role in the cycle. This kind of informed refusal reflects the influence of Aldia's thinking, the idea that understanding the nature of a system gives one the power to refuse participation in it. Similarly, the various endings available in Dark Souls 3 represent a broader range of choices than were available in earlier games. The option to usurp the fire rather than simply linking it or letting it fade suggests that future generations learned from Aldia's recognition that the traditional binary was insufficient. Even the physical structure of Lothric, with its focus on scholarly research and its attempts to transcend traditional limitations, reflects Aldia's influence. The scholars of the Grand Archives pursued forbidden knowledge in much the same way that Aldia did, though they appear to have been more interested in personal power than in understanding fundamental truths about the nature of existence. The tragedy is that while Aldia's intellectual legacy influenced later scholars and thinkers, his moral legacy, the recognition that the pursuit of knowledge must be balanced with wisdom and compassion seems to have been largely ignored. The scholars of Lothric fell into the same traps that consumed Aldia: the willingness to sacrifice others for understanding, the belief that moral constraints were obstacles to truth, the gradual corruption that comes from touching powers beyond human comprehension, the nature of truth and deception. One of the most profound aspects of Aldia's character is his complex relationship with truth and deception. He understands that the world is built on fundamental lies: the lie that the cycle of fire and dark is natural, the lie that the undead curse is an unavoidable affliction, the lie that the choices presented to heroes are meaningful. But his response to these lies is itself a form of deception. When Aldia speaks of the wonderful falsehood of a normal life, he's acknowledging that truth isn't always preferable to comfortable illusion. Most people can live meaningful, fulfilling lives without understanding the cosmic forces that shape their existence. The knowledge that Aldia possesses doesn't make people happier or more fulfilled. It often makes them more isolated and desperate. This creates a moral dilemma that Aldia never fully resolves. If truth leads to despair and deception enables happiness, which should be chosen? If understanding the nature of the cycle doesn't provide practical solutions, what's the value of that understanding? If breaking free from false choices requires abandoning everything that gives life meaning, is that freedom worth pursuing? Aldia's own transformation can be seen as an attempt to resolve this dilemma by transcending it entirely. By becoming something beyond human concerns, he placed himself in a position where he could pursue truth without being paralyzed by its implications. But this solution created new problems. Without human emotions and motivations, his pursuit of truth became abstract and ultimately purposeless. The deception that Aldia practices is more subtle than the lies he exposes. He doesn't lie about the nature of the cycle or the artificial character of the undead curse. Instead, he deceives himself and others about the possibility of meaningful alternatives. His third path is presented as a solution, but it's really just another form of escapism, running away from false choices rather than finding ways to create true ones. This connects to broader themes about the relationship between knowledge and action in the Dark Souls universe. Characters who gain complete understanding of their situation often become paralyzed by that understanding. They see the futility of all available choices and respond by withdrawing from choice entirely. But withdrawal isn't the same as transcendence, and refusing to choose isn't the same as creating new options. Aldia's tragedy is that his vast understanding never translated into practical wisdom. He could see through the lies that shaped his world, but he couldn't envision truths that might replace them. He could recognize false choices, but he couldn't create true ones. His knowledge made him powerful, but not effective, informed, but not wise. The horror of good intentions. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Aldia's character is how his transformation into a monster grew out of genuinely good intentions. He didn't set out to become a horrifying entity that bound people to bonfires and spoke in riddles about cosmic truths. He began as a scholar who wanted to help his brother free their subjects from a terrible curse. The experiments at Aldia's Keep, for all their horror, were conducted in service of a goal that most people would consider noble. The undead curse causes immense suffering across countless generations. If a relatively small number of test subjects had to suffer and die to break that curse forever, wouldn't that be a worthwhile trade? This utilitarian logic is morally questionable, but it's not obviously wrong in the way that pursuing power for its own sake would be. Aldia's willingness to experiment on himself demonstrates that he wasn't simply a callous researcher who valued others' lives lightly. He was willing to pay the same price he demanded from his test subjects. His transformation wasn't the result of cowardice or selfishness. It was the result of a completely sincere commitment to his research goals. This makes Aldia more terrifying than villains who are motivated by obvious evil. He represents the danger of good intentions unchecked by moral wisdom, of compassion divorced from humanity, of the pursuit of noble goals through increasingly corrupt means. His story demonstrates how the road to monstrous behavior can be paved with genuine desire to help others. The corruption of Aldia's research follows a pattern that's recognizable in real-world contexts. Each step in his descent was justified by reference to previous steps and future goals. Once he had begun experimenting on living subjects, it became easier to justify more extreme experiments. Once he had accepted that some suffering was necessary for the greater good, it became easier to accept that greater suffering might be necessary for even greater good. The gradual nature of this corruption makes it particularly insidious. Aldia didn't wake up one day and decide to become a monster. He made a series of small compromises, each of which seemed reasonable within its own context. By the time he reached the point where he was willing to experiment on himself, the transformation of his values was already complete. This pattern reflects broader themes about the nature of evil in the Dark Souls universe. Most of the truly horrifying figures in these games, Seath, the Witch of Izalith, even Gwyn himself, began with understandable motivations and reasonable goals. They became monsters, not through sudden moral collapse, but through gradual corruption. each step justified by reference to noble purposes that had become twisted beyond recognition. The question of redemption. One of the most complex questions raised by Aldia's story is whether redemption is possible for someone who has fallen so far from their original humanity. His transformation is so complete, his crimes so extensive, and his current existence so alien that traditional concepts of forgiveness and redemption seem inadequate. Yet Aldia's final act, offering the bearer of the curse a choice beyond the traditional binary, suggests that some trace of his original motivation remains. He still wants to help others escape the cycle that trapped him. He still seeks solutions to the problems that originally drove his research. His methods have become incomprehensible, and his existence has become monstrous, but his fundamental goal remains recognizably altruistic. This raises profound questions about the nature of identity and moral responsibility. Is the entity we encounter in Scholar of the First Sin still Aldia in any meaningful sense? Or is it something else wearing his memories and knowledge? Can someone who has transformed so completely still be held accountable for their original intentions? Or do they become something entirely new? The fact that Aldia doesn't drop souls when defeated, doesn't die in the conventional sense, and continues speaking after his apparent destruction suggests that normal rules of judgment don't apply to him. He exists in a state that's beyond traditional concepts of life and death, punishment and reward, redemption and damnation. Perhaps the most meaningful form of redemption for Aldia lies not in personal forgiveness, but in the potential for his knowledge to help others avoid his mistakes, his understanding of the cycle's artificial nature, his recognition of the false choices that trap heroes, and his awareness of the need for genuine alternatives. All of this could be valuable to future generations if they can learn from his experience without repeating his errors. The bearer of the curse's ability to walk away from the throne of want represents a kind of vindication for Aldia's research. Not because his methods were justified, they clearly weren't, but because his fundamental insight about the nature of choice and freedom proved correct. The possibility of refusing false choices, of seeking alternatives to predetermined paths, of choosing uncertainty over false security. These insights came at a terrible price, but they did provide genuine value. The metaphysics of transformation. Aldia's transformation raises fascinating questions about the nature of souls, consciousness, and identity in the Dark Souls universe. What exactly happened when he experimented on himself? How did he become bound to the bonfires? What does his current existence actually consist of? The fact that Aldia appears to be composed of fire, branches, and raw magical energy suggests that his transformation involved fundamental changes to the nature of his soul. Souls in Dark Souls aren't just sources of power, they're the foundation of identity, memory, and consciousness. When Aldia altered his soul sufficiently to achieve his current state, he may have changed the very basis of his existence. His connection to the bonfires is particularly significant. Bonfires in the Dark Souls universe are focal points for the power of the First Flame, places where the artificial cycle of fire and dark is maintained and reinforced. By binding himself to these locations, Aldia may have become part of the very system he sought to escape. This binding could be interpreted as the ultimate irony of his research. In trying to transcend the cycle of fire and dark, he became more deeply embedded in it than any normal undead. Where other souls are simply trapped by the cycle, Aldia's soul may have become part of the machinery that maintains it. Alternatively, his binding to the bonfires might represent a different kind of transcendence. Perhaps by becoming part of the system, he gained the ability to understand and potentially influence it in ways that would be impossible for someone existing outside it. His appearances to the bearer of the curse might represent interventions in the cycle designed to introduce new possibilities into what had previously been a closed system. The ambiguity surrounding Aldia's current state reflects broader uncertainty about the nature of consciousness and identity in the Dark Souls universe. Are souls the same as consciousness? Can identity persist through radical transformation? Is continuity of memory sufficient to establish personal identity across dramatic changes in the nature of existence? These questions don't have clear answers within the game's lore, but they're essential to understanding what Aldia has become and what his transformation means for the broader themes of the series. The Scholar's Final Wisdom. In his final dialogue, after his defeat and the bearer of the curse's choice about the throne, Aldia reveals perhaps the most important insight of his entire existence. When he speaks of there being no path beyond the scope of light or the reach of dark, he's not describing a limitation, but a truth about the nature of choice itself. The third path that Aldia offers isn't actually a path in the conventional sense. It's not a route to a destination or a method for achieving specific goals. It's the recognition that meaningful choice requires accepting uncertainty, that true freedom comes from refusing to be limited by the options that others provide, even when that refusal means entering unknown territory. This insight represents a form of wisdom that Aldia achieved despite, or perhaps because of, everything he lost in his transformation. The understanding that freedom means accepting uncertainty, that truth means abandoning comfortable illusions, that meaningful choice requires courage to face the unknown. These insights couldn't have been gained through conventional research or normal experience. Aldia's offer to accompany the bearer of the curse on this pathless journey represents the final expression of his original motivation. Despite everything he's become, despite all the horror and corruption of his research, he still wants to help others escape the traps that bind them. His methods have become alien, and his existence has become monstrous, but his fundamental desire to serve others' freedom remains intact. The bearer of the curse's choice to walk away from the throne of want, if they make it, represents the fulfillment of everything Aldia worked toward. Not because it solves the problems of the cycle or breaks the undead curse. It doesn't accomplish either of those things, but because it demonstrates that genuine choice is possible, that individuals can refuse to be limited by the options provided by systems designed to perpetuate themselves. This choice validates Aldia's core insight while rejecting his methods. It proves that his understanding of the cycle's artificial nature was correct, without endorsing the horrific experiments that led to that understanding. It demonstrates that the pursuit of truth and freedom is worthwhile, without accepting that any price is justified in that pursuit. The scholar's place in the larger cosmos. Aldia's story gains additional resonance when considered in the context of the broader Dark Souls universe. His recognition that the cycle of fire and dark was artificial, and his search for alternatives to predetermined choices connect him to larger themes that span the entire series. The relationship between order and chaos, light and dark, stagnation and change. These fundamental tensions shape every aspect of the Dark Souls world. Aldia's contribution to this cosmic narrative is his recognition that these apparent opposites might actually be false choices, designed to perpetuate a system that serves neither human flourishing nor cosmic truth. His research into dragons and giants, his attempts to understand the nature of souls and existence, his ultimate transformation into something beyond normal categories, all of this can be seen as an attempt to find or create a synthesis that transcends the binary thinking that traps most characters in the series. The fact that Aldia is referred to as the first of the scholars in Dark Souls 3 suggests that his influence extends far beyond his direct appearances. The scholars of Lothric, the researchers of the Grand Archives, the various NPCs who pursue forbidden knowledge throughout the series, all of them can be seen as inheriting aspects of Aldia's approach and methodology. But Aldia's story also serves as a warning about the dangers of pursuing knowledge without wisdom, understanding without compassion, truth without consideration for its human cost. The scholars who came after him often repeated his mistakes. The willingness to sacrifice others for understanding, the belief that moral constraints were obstacles to truth, the gradual corruption that comes from touching powers beyond human comprehension. In this sense, Aldia's legacy is deeply ambivalent. His insights about the nature of choice and freedom were valuable and important. His methods for pursuing those insights were horrifying and destructive. His influence on later generations led to both genuine understanding and terrible corruption. The horror and beauty of knowledge. Horror, and perhaps the most complex aspect of Aldia's character, is how he embodies both the horror and beauty of the pursuit of knowledge. His research revealed truths that were genuinely important and valuable. The artificial nature of the undead curse, the false character of the traditional choices between fire and dark, the possibility of alternatives to predetermined paths. But the methods he used to uncover these truths were genuinely horrifying. The experiments at his keep, the transformation of researchers into monsters, the creation of artificial life through the suffering of countless victims. These aren't abstract crimes that can be dismissed, because they served a greater purpose. They represent real suffering inflicted on real people for the sake of abstract understanding. This tension between the value of knowledge and the cost of acquiring it runs throughout the Dark Souls series, but it's nowhere more explicitly explored than in Aldia's story. He achieved genuine understanding about fundamental aspects of reality, but that understanding came at a price that included not just his own humanity, but the humanity of everyone who helped him in his research. The question his story poses is whether this trade was worthwhile. Can knowledge be valuable enough to justify the suffering required to obtain it? Can understanding be important enough to excuse the methods used to achieve it? Can truth be worth the price paid for it? These aren't questions with easy answers, and the game doesn't provide definitive guidance about how they should be resolved. Different players will likely come to different conclusions based on their own values and philosophical commitments. What the game does provide is a clear example of how the pursuit of knowledge, divorced from moral wisdom and human compassion, can lead to outcomes that undermine the very values that originally motivated the pursuit. Aldia began wanting to help people and ended up causing immense suffering. He began seeking to preserve humanity and ended up transcending it entirely. The scholar as tragic hero. In many ways, Aldia fits the classical definition of a tragic hero. He was a figure of high status and noble intentions, whose own character flaws led to his downfall. His story evokes pity and fear. Pity for what he lost and became. Fear that the same fate might await anyone who pursues knowledge too intensely or with too little wisdom. But Aldia's tragedy is more complex than traditional tragic heroes, because his downfall came through the pursuit of genuinely noble goals, rather than through obvious character flaws like pride or ambition. His tragic flaw, if it can be called that, was his inability to balance his desire for understanding with respect for human limitations and moral constraints. This makes his story particularly relevant to contemporary concerns about the relationship between scientific research and ethical responsibility. In our own world, we face similar questions about how far researchers should be allowed to go in pursuit of knowledge, what ethical constraints should apply to scientific investigation, and how to balance the potential benefits of research against its potential costs. Aldia's story suggests that these questions can't be answered through simple utilitarian calculus. The potential benefits of knowledge, no matter how great, don't automatically justify any particular methods for obtaining that knowledge. The pursuit of truth, no matter how noble, doesn't excuse the abandonment of moral responsibility. At the same time, Aldia's story doesn't support anti-intellectual positions that would reject the pursuit of knowledge entirely. His insights about the nature of choice and freedom were genuinely valuable. His understanding of the artificial character of the cycle led to possibilities for transcendence that wouldn't have existed otherwise. The tragedy of Aldia is not that he pursued knowledge, but that he pursued it without wisdom. The lesson of his story is not that truth should be avoided, but that it should be sought with appropriate respect for its human cost and with proper consideration for the moral implications of different methods of investigation. Conclusion: the scholar's eternal question. As we reach the end of our journey through Aldia's story, we're left with the same question that he poses to the bearer of the curse. What do we seek? Light, dark, or something beyond them both? Aldia's transformation from noble scholar to cosmic horror serves as both warning and inspiration. It warns us about the dangers of pursuing knowledge without wisdom, of seeking truth without compassion, of trying to transcend human limitations without respecting human values. But it also inspires us to question false choices, to seek alternatives to predetermined paths, to refuse to be limited by options provided by systems designed to perpetuate themselves. The scholar of the first sin achieved something unprecedented in the Dark Souls universe. He found a way to offer genuine choice to someone trapped by the cycle of fire and dark. The price he paid for this achievement was terrible. His methods were horrifying, and his transformation was complete. But his core insight, that meaningful freedom requires the courage to reject false choices and enter unknown territory, remains valuable despite everything else. Perhaps the most fitting memorial to Aldia would be for future generations to learn from both his achievements and his failures, to seek truth, but with wisdom, to pursue knowledge, but with compassion, to question established systems, but not to abandon human values in the process, to offer genuine choices to others, but not to pay any price for the ability to do so. The scholar of the first sin stands as one of the most complex and fascinating characters in the entire Dark Souls universe. His story encompasses themes of family loyalty and betrayal, noble intentions and horrifying methods, cosmic understanding and human tragedy. He achieved transcendence at the cost of everything that made transcendence worthwhile, found truth at the price of losing the capacity to act on that truth. In the end, Aldia's greatest achievement may be that he made it possible for others to choose differently than he did. The bearer of the curse can walk away from the throne of want precisely because Aldia showed them that such choices were possible. Future generations can learn from his mistakes precisely because he paid the price for making them. The scholar's question remains: what do you seek? Light, dark, or something beyond them both? The question itself is his legacy. Not the answer he found, but the recognition that the question needed to be asked. Not the path he walked, but the understanding that other paths were possible. And so concludes our deep dive into the scholar of the first sin. We've discovered the tragic transformation of a brilliant mind, the terrible price of forbidden knowledge, and the complex legacy of someone who transcended humanity in pursuit of truth. The legacy of Aldia continues to influence the world of Dark Souls, reminding us that the pursuit of knowledge must be balanced with wisdom, that the desire for freedom must be tempered with compassion, and that the most important choice is often the courage to question whether the choices we're given are the only ones available. Next time on Lore 2 RPG, we'll explore another tragic figure from the world of Dark Souls, diving deep into the story of Seath the Scaleless and his obsession with immortality. Until then, keep exploring those epic tales, fellow adventurers, and remember that sometimes the most profound truth is recognizing that there are always more questions to ask. Thanks for joining me on this journey through one of gaming's most complex and fascinating character studies. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Aldia's lore, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more extensive explorations of gaming's greatest stories. Your support helps me continue creating these detailed examinations of the rich narratives that make gaming such a powerful storytelling medium.